Hi, and thanks so much for coming back to the channel. This is a video on the Boise North End and why it's so hard to price and find out what the true values are. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of what our tax record looks like, what the photos of the home look like, and why it's so confusing, and then how can you know how to price the home. Some basic rules of thumb for pricing homes that are single level, two-story, or two-story with a basement, or single level with a basement, how we look at the basement square footage and where we get values, different positions on the street, etc., etc. So let's take a look at Boise's prime north end. Here's a map of that. And you can see the prime north end means that that is where people want to live the most. So buyers want to buy the most number of homes in that region. It's also a very limited region of Boise and the north end. And because of that, people are clamoring sometimes to get a home in there, even in a market where it may be not as scarce. People would still prefer to live in this prime area as opposed to other areas. A couple of reasons for that. A, it's completely accessible to trails and hiking and downtown and the schools. So some people prefer the schools in those areas as well. So being close and being accessible to downtown is incredibly important in Boise. Why, you ask? Well, because we have a very active lifestyle here. People love being on the Greenbelt, riding their bikes on the Greenbelt, and accessing the Greenbelt. The Greenbelt is also on our river. The Boise River has the highest CFL's flow of any waterway that's near Boise. So that means that the river is great for fishing, swimming, kayaking, rafting, and surfing on some parts of it. So there are a few things that you need to look for when you're looking at a home and trying to get values. The historic homes tend to have higher values because we went through some classic eras of building from about the early 1900s all the way through really the mid-century. And some people will consider mid-century to go almost to 1970. And then you do have some 1970s homes that are a carryover from mid-century, but the mid-century is in that 40s to 60s eras. So those decades, and those are classic homes. And then you have the bungalow era, cottage era, Queen Anne, and all the other historic building. Why that's important is that Boise has what's called a historic district and a historic part of the North End, and those homes are protected, which makes it so idyllic. There are also some prime streets. Harrison, 18th, and 24th are all prime streets in Boise. So those streets will also tend to garner a higher price per square foot, a higher dollar amount, and a higher desirability. So let's take a look at a tax record. So let's take a look at this home. We're going to insert this home here, and then let's look at the tax record. It can be very confusing because a lot of the tax records, the tax information is very old. People have owned these homes for years and years and years. They may have done updates. And if you're an agent or a consumer, you really don't know what's what. You're like, why is the tax record so much different than the listing price? Well, because in Idaho, you do not have to audit or get audited on your home like in other states. They want to make sure that every single inch of livable square footage is added to the tax record so that they can tax you. But in Idaho, that's not required. So let's say you have a 1,300 square foot home and then you have a basement, or as in the example here, you have a set square footage, and then you have the basement square footage. It could be finished or unfinished. So it's your job as a buyer, a consumer, or as an agent to figure out that square footage, make sure it's finished or not finished, and don't get caught thinking that it is finished, because if it's not finished, it is not finished. It's probably a dirt floor, probably not usable, probably not going to be counted on an appraisal. If it is finished, it's going to be counted about 40 cents on the dollar. And so it doesn't get counted like for like, and that is where quite a few agents will misstep on pricing in the North End. So when we price in the North End, what we need to consider is it single level, 2-story? That gets more value than single level with a basement, 2-story with a basement, if that makes sense. Then we're going to consider that above square footage, which is the single level or the second story or a 2-story home. And then we're going to consider that basement square footage, right? But it's going to be considered quite a bit less. And so when we look at values, we're really thinking, okay, what is the above square footage? As you can see, here is a spreadsheet that I'm including. And we can see that the above square footage in the right aisle there, that right column, that above square footage is really what we're looking for, because generally the above square footage is the most usable space, and some people won't even go into a basement. And so that is where the highest value is going to be drawn. Now, there are some basements that are what we call garden levels, walkout basements, daylight, like lots of light basements. And those basements tend to get a little bit higher, counted a little bit higher, because they're light and bright and they don't feel like a dungeon, if that makes sense. So they don't have little teeny tiny windows. They have huge ingress egress windows that bring a lot of light, a lot of nature inside out. So they feel much more like a second floor. And so for that reason, those will get a higher value, but that is on a case-by-case basis. So just the overall general rule of thumb is, let's take another record. So we have this beautiful home, and then here is the tax sheet, and you could see the square footage. You have above square footage and below square footage. And so we're going to be pricing this above and below, and we're going to be considering the above square footage higher than the below square footage. And I'll give you quick values on both of those homes so that you can see right here. So this is a range that I would price both of these homes. And if you want more information about how to price in the North End, don't hesitate to DM me. I'm happy to discuss. I'm happy to talk about the North End and why those values are that way, what makes that unique, if you're confused about it, hopefully you're not. Hopefully you can understand that. And then also the tax records in Idaho, they're different, right? And then also just make sure that you know that Zillow does not get all of the information on our homes, because we are a non-disclosure state, which means that when we purchase a home, we don't have to disclose that information in the sale of the home. So oftentimes, Zillow won't know the information. We also in Idaho pay taxes in arrears. In arrears, you're saying? Yes, in arrears. In arrears means that in December, I'm not going to be paying the full tax amount. I'm only going to be paying the first half, and then the next June, I'm going to be paying the second half. I know it's confusing. DM me, have a conversation. I'd love to talk about your real estate goals if you have them. And if you're an agent, I'd love to discuss North End pricing. I'm happy to do that, would love to do that. And as always, be safe, be happy, and be home. Bye-bye.